So today I'm going to talk to you guys about WRAXU playing Hanzo, and the first thing I'm going to say is that Hanzo is still really statistically a weak pick. He's the worst hero in the game right now, statistically, with like a 41% win rate, and I'd say overall, don't really play Hanzo unless A, you want to become better with him, then of course play whoever you want to, or B, you're just really a god at this game and you can play whoever. But if you're just a player that wants to play a lot of different DPS and wants to just have fun with them, maybe save Hanzo for quick play, because honestly, he's not a very consistent character, and while you can make him consistent if you are super good with him, the vast majority of players aren't good enough with him to really be worth picking up this character. Of course, I'm not saying you shouldn't play him, play whatever you want to, but that's kind of how the statistics go. I hope that someday he gets fixed as far as that goes, but whatever. Anyways, as far as some tips about actual WRAXU right here, the first one to talk about, I think, is obviously the high ground that he abuses. He always is on high ground as Hanzo, and there's a lot of good reasons. It makes it that your scatter arrow is way easier to hit, it makes it that your headshots are way more consistent, it makes it that it's a lot harder for people to get up to you and for people to pick you, and they have to use a lot of abilities to do that, for example with the Junkrat, and overall it's just a lot safer for you as Hanzo, and you can do it really easily with his wall climb. I know that a lot of people don't really bother to do that, but it is definitely something that you should probably try to focus on more. Another thing I want to mention is that you can charge up your arrow and then wall climb, so if you know someone's around like a corner or something, or up the wall, you can have a fully charged arrow and one-shot headshot them before they can really do anything. So that's a way that you can kind of counter high ground and get the high ground for yourself as this character. And mainly though, you want high ground as Hanzo because it makes you more consistent, and that is really what Hanzo needs. It's hard to play consistently, as I was saying earlier, but it is possible, and high ground can definitely do that for you. As well, make sure that when you are on high ground, you're kind of moving around. A lot of the times he does kind of go near the same place, but if someone tries to go after him, he backs off a little bit, starts shooting at them, and waits for his team to really help him up. And overall, he uses his arrow to, of course, try to get the pick, but if he can't get the pick, he uses it at least for a little bit of spacing, for some ult charge, and to just kind of force them out of the fight. Just a little bit. And right there, unfortunately, his team got pushed off the point at the last second. Well, not the last second, but his team got pushed off the point. The enemies turned, just got a few picks on his team, so it's kind of unfortunate for that. And he didn't get heals at the last second, but whatever. They turned it off to the second point, and I think WRAXU does so great on the second point. One thing about the Sonic arrow that I want to mention is that he uses it, almost every single time it's off cooldown, really. But for the most part, he uses the Sonic arrow where the majority of the enemy team is already, which I think a lot of people wouldn't really think about. They think, shoot it where you don't know where people are, so then you can maybe headshot them. You want to shoot it where people are, so you can walk around corners, shoot them, and then, hide around the corner again, then go out, shoot them, hide around the corner again, just so you know where people are, and just so you can just get headshots the second you go around a corner, and it makes it really hard for them to counter you as Hanzo. Alright, here is a great team fight. WRAXU pops off, just kills everybody, and that's kind of how Hanzo goes. Again, he's kind of hard to be consistent with, but if you can get the pop off, I think he's one of the best characters as far as carrying in the entire game, if you can get it to work, and if your team can really just stall for enough time for you. As Hanzo, you just kind of need some time to get your picks, and if the enemy team just dives on your team and starts getting kills, it's going to be hard for you. You just need time, you need people to push, or even just a team to counter engage, anything like that. Now on defense, we see right here, of course, he's again using high ground every single second he can. One thing about high ground that's really useful is that you can actually use it to get to different places of high ground. For example, on this point, I think it's really obvious. He can climb walls and kind of like jump around the corner of the wall to just get on really weird high angles. Right here we see something which was nice, which is of course a super good freaking ultimate. And his ult, for the most part, is something that you want to try to do because it can just force people backwards. And you also don't really want to use your ult way too much unless people are stuck in a room. Because if they are, you can clean up, you can force them backwards, or you can just force them to stay there, I guess. But, that's kind of how it goes with your ultimate, and that's kind of how it goes with climbing as well. For the scatter arrow, of course, it's an important thing to try to hit. For the most part, WRAXU actually goes for scatters before his headshots. You can kind of decide either way, but scatter arrow is a really easy thing to hit if you are on the high ground, of course, which he often is, so there's that benefit to him. And as well, I guess one thing I should say about Hanzo is that on defense, it doesn't really matter way too much who you kill as long as you get a kill, because if you get a kill and if you get a pick before the enemy team even goes in, they're gonna have to back off and wait for their teammates. So even if you just pick off a tank over and over again, or support or a DPS or anything, that's really good enough on defense. Hanzo's kind of awkward to play on defense because you do have to get that pick, otherwise your team often gets steamrolled, but do keep that in mind and don't save your scatter arrow just to pick off the enemy supports. If you see a tank that you can easily kill or at least easily pressure or get to really low HP and force them back so they have to wait another 20-30 seconds to engage, that's worth it for you almost every single time. That's just kind of how Hanzo goes again. Because he doesn't really have the best counter engage, you kind of just have to always be on the offensive and always be engaging, at least, when you have a little bit of health. and always be trying to get a pick. Otherwise, again, you aren't really adding way too much value during team fights, anything like that. Even with his ultimate, which is a pretty good team fight ultimate, it's not way too strong unless you have something like a Ryan ult or a Zarya ult or something that holds them still. So kind of think of Hanzo less of a teamfight character and again more of a pick character. And I guess try to play like that as well. I guess something else I should say about Hanzo. Again, right here, WRAXU is getting on the high ground, making sense. Try to pick off, I think, the fair or whatever. But I want to say that Hanzo can easily work on offense or defense. But for the average player, offense is a lot easier. On defense, you obviously have to get a ton of picks all the time. You have to make sure you're up so you can get those picks, but also so you're not too far up so you get picked yourself. It's kind of hard. But on offense, it's quite a bit easier because you can just keep going in over and over again. Your team will just kind of have to wait for you instead of your team losing the entire point. And I think for the average player, playing on offense is probably, you know, a better idea than trying to play on defense. As far as predicting shots, of course, he mainly just shoots near where the enemies are and then kind of predicts if they're going to be going right or left a little bit and shoots at about their head height every single time. He also uses a little dot to aim, so that's kind of nice. And I guess one final thing is during that fight, you can actually one-shot people like Mercy really easily as Hanzo, so try to go for it, especially if you're higher than them. But her hitbox also kind of sucks, so I mean, it's worth a shot. It's worth a try. Hanzo's one of the only characters that I feel like can actually easily kill her, but realize that it's going to be kind of a pain in the butt for you to do. Now on to offense a little bit, which again I think is a bit better for Hanzo. A problem is, again, though, if the enemy team has like a counter dive comp, it can be kind of hard, but during this game, they don't. Again, WRAXU gets on high ground, his team's getting a few picks, they're getting a few picks. On this first point, it takes him a little while, but again, and again, and again, he is getting on that high ground, and it kind of depends on the map. Some maps, you might be able to take some kind of high ground, and some maps you have to take other high ground. I think one really good thing about Hanzo, though, that I was talking about at the beginning, is that Hanzo can actually counter the enemy taking high ground really well, because you charge your shot up, you go up high ground, and you bomb, body shot, or headshot them, or go for your scatter arrow, or anything like that, and you should be able to kill them relatively easily. Alright, here of course he's shooting whoever he can see. Don't really push up way too far as Hanzo, just kind of play where it's safe, play where it's smart, and if you see tanks, again, it's worth your time to actually try to kill those tanks, and to just get a lot of free pressure out of that, so that's essentially what he's doing again and again. As well, if you see the enemy, like let's say this Junkrat, who keeps coming around the same place over and over and over again, kind of just start spamming there, spam it about headshot, head height, to try to get some headshots, because oftentimes as Hanzo, that's some of the easiest ways to get kills, and especially in lower ranks where people just kind of engage at the same time in the same place over and over again. I mean, those are free kills that you're kind of missing out as Hanzo, so just go for them, because again, the prediction, at least when you don't see anyone, just spamming out a little bit is almost always going to be a little bit worth your time. Right here, another nice wall climb, gets onto high ground, gets behind the enemies, I guess kind of side with the enemies. Gets a nice ult right there, which of course forces the enemies to either go in or to take a lot of damage. Unfortunately, his team didn't go in, or WRAXU's team didn't go in exactly when he went for his ultimate, but in the end it works out pretty well anyways, because they go in, you know, kind of soon after. And as you see right here, the enemies either have to turn to block WRAXU from doing damage, or they have to attack his enemy, his entire team, WRAXU's team. Either way, it's not that good for the enemy team. Just having him on high ground, just spamming out damage, and he gets 2 or 3 picks right here, so yeah, again, high ground, that's just the thing you have to drill into your mind whenever you're playing this character. Again, he does have a lot of good ways to get there. And then on offense, you kind of want to focus a bit more onto supports. Of course, you do want to focus on getting the enemy DPS, because if you can pick off something like a Junkrat, you can essentially just immediately go in and probably stomp the enemies. But even if you can just get a tank, you know, that is fine. But on defense, he goes for a lot more of tanks and healers, because they're usually easy to pick off, because they usually overextended a bit. But on offense, he goes for more offensive heroes, which is a little bit weird. Sorry about that. Hit the mic a second ago. Right here again, you know, we're seeing him push up. We saw him get a nice scatter arrow. Unfortunately, the enemy monkey, or what is it, Diva jumps on her, so that's not way too great. But right now, his ultimate's charged. He can do some stuff with that. Overall, I'm going to say that his ultimate, or not his, but Hanzo's ultimate, isn't really that great at getting kills. While it can team wipe and while it can do well, the best thing you want to try to do for it is to force the enemies out of really good areas. Like right there, he forced them out of a really good high ground spot, so that was nice. Or to just force the enemies into a bad fight. So let's say that the enemy Junkrat already used his ult and used some of his burst, and then you ult behind him. Well, the Junkrat has to go in that situation, and that's going to be a good situation for you either way. And that's kind of what you want to do with your ultimate. Of course, you can charge it up pretty quickly, so don't be too afraid about using it. And if you do have a Zarya, of course, do always save it for the Zarya. But if you don't have a combo, then you kind of just want to use it for spacing more than really anything else. All right, here we see a nice use of his Sonic Arrow. He can just wait for the enemies to come around the corner, and I think he gets a pick on someone on the ground right here. Maybe the Junkrat with a scatter. Of course, putting up the Sonic again, putting down the scatter on the ground, and there we go. Something like that. There we go. He gets a headshot, I mean, in the air. So whatever, but he did know that that Junkrat was going to be around there. I think about the Sonic Arrow that you want to keep in mind, though, is that you shouldn't be trying to shoot at exactly where the enemies are at, but kind of like where in between where they're at and where they're going to back up to, so that you can see them for a few extra steps, I guess. I don't really know how to explain that. That's just kind of what he's doing. He isn't really just trying to hit the enemies with his arrow. He's just shooting kind of where they might back up to. All right, here again, his team tries to push up. Unfortunately, gets picked off by the Genji, and they wait for another engage. But they're running a little bit low on time, but still, I feel like WRAXU was just getting a ton of picks himself. And that's one thing you kind of have to just take as this character. Sometimes you're going to be able to pick everybody, kill everybody. Your team's going to be going in at the same time, but sometimes you might get a pick when your team already has one person that's dead, and if that's the case, you're just tied right there. And since your team comps don't work amazingly with Hanzo, it's going to be kind of hard for you. And that's mainly what we're going to see during these last 2 rounds. And actually, in the end, they end up losing this. But I feel like it is very close, and I feel like as far as WRAXU, he does as good as he humanly possibly can, just his team kind of gets picked. And that's one thing you might want to keep in mind. You just want to keep try to get picks, try to get whatever you can as that offensive Hanzo. But the power of Hanzo really isn't his consistency like a Soldier or like a McCree or like even a Widow if you're really good at her. But again, the pop-off potential. Kind of like Genji, I guess. They are brothers, so that would make sense. But, you kind of have to keep that in mind and realize that you can't just... Even if you get a kill, it doesn't mean that you're going to win that team fight. And even if you get a kill, doesn't mean that your team can just immediately go in. There's a lot of different factors that you do have to think about this character. Right here, he's trying to figure out how to climb up that. That's a weird thing to get up. Sometimes that does happen. But the only really big tip that I have for this second push is, unfortunately, gets blown up by that. But Hanzo actually works really nice with shields. Of course, you can hide behind them, spam out a lot of damage. But I feel like the most important thing about playing Hanzo with shields is that it gets a lot of the enemy's attention. So you can jump on the high ground, you can get a lot of free damage while the enemies are focusing on your shield. And I'm going to say, for the most part, try to not actually hide behind your own shields. Try to get to high ground, unless it's a point that there's no high ground that you can get next to, then of course hide behind the shield. But for the most part, try to get to high ground, try to just get a lot of poke, a lot of picks, while your team is just taking a grunt load of damage. And of course, it'll also make so that the supports don't have to heal you as much and they can focus more on the tanks. So generally, that's kind of how that can benefit you. Fortunately, his team couldn't push up through this round. He gets a few picks himself, WRAXU does, but doesn't really work out way too well, and now they're finally on this defense, and it really is quite a close match. But the enemies went into a dive comp, and again, Hanzo on defense is kind of hard to face against dive comps, because unless he gets a pick right here in the first 1 second, they can just dive on him and dive on his team, and it's going to be kind of hard. And I think he might even still get close to getting a pick, so right there, almost gets a pick, but now since he didn't, the enemy has a dive comp, they can just kind of jump on him, and especially since he's not getting way too much healing himself, unless he can extremely pop off immediately, it's going to be hard for his team to do way too much. So again, with Hanzo, it's hard for you to counter dive, but it is possible. Even the best Hanzo in the world, though, does sometimes have troubles because, it's just hard for the character. It's just kind of like the counterplay against the character. Unfortunately, it kind of goes bad right here, and they finally get picked off in the end. But overall, I feel like there's a lot to be learned about WRAXU playing Hanzo. He's a super good win rate with this character, and is all the way, maybe not right this very second, but for a long time has been in top 500, and even maybe right now is still in top 500, but for a huge amount of time has been Grandmaster. And I feel like if you want to learn how to play the character, how to aim, where to stand, he's a really good idea to just, kind of learn the basics from, and to go on from there. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I know that this was a lost game, but I do like to show some games where the pro players don't win every single match, because then you can kind of learn what went wrong and maybe when they should have switched and when some other stuff could have went a little bit better, because not every single person wins every single game. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Leave a like if you want to see more stuff like this in the future. And as always, guys, have a wonderful day.